Steidl were the
Of
top
course.
of the list, the number one choice, and I never expected to hear back from them, because really, like, this is not the kind of work they would generally go for, and like war photography is not an easy sell for anyone. And I'd had, like, every other publisher had written back and said, oh, it's lovely work, but we don't really publish books about conflict because they don't sell. Or some had said, yeah, it's great work, and I think it would be a great book. Do you have any money to publish it? I'm like, what, me? I'm not the publisher,
Okay.
But that's how it works
Sure,
these days.
yeah.
You're expected to go to a publisher with 10, 15 grand and pay them to publish your book, and I'm like, no, like what? Like what's in it for me, apart from vanity? So I was never going to do that. I didn't go for any of the other offers that were made. And then after 2 or 3 months, I just got an email from Steidl out of the blue saying they wanted to do the book, and I couldn't believe it.
Okay.
And I was so glad that I stuck it out, and and had waited. Not that I expected to hear from them. And that was that. They were just like, yeah, we want to do your book next year. In 2000, they wanted to come out in 2019, and that was it. That's how it started. And I made two trips to Germany, to Göttingen.
Yeah, I think it's probably every photographer's dream to make a book with Steidl. So what I wanted to ask you about was
Yeah.
that process.
Yeah,
Of
a lot of
working
people.
with him, and the attention to detail that he brings to bookmaking and everything.
Yeah, no, it's like the mecca of photo book publishing, because there are other amazing publishers out there, but he's one of the godfathers of it, and it's amazing because he's got his own printing press, and the whole structure there is incredible. You go and you stay in an apartment building that he's built purely for the photographers who he's working with, and you go and stay in your own little flat, and then work in the printing in the printing house for the time that you're there for 3 or 4 days. They put you up. They've got their own in-house chef.
Okay.
It's amazing. And you basically sit around in the library, which is at the top of the building, and just wait for your time with Steidl. Like, you could be waiting all day. You might be the last person that he's going to attend to, but you sit there patiently waiting for your moment, and eventually he comes, and clicks his fingers, and you have to jump up and listen to what he says. And you're there for like 3 or 4 days. I was there for 3 or 4 days initially, and that's when you do you finalize the design. You need to come with the edit pretty much done at that point. Maybe you've got your own design already. Maybe you're working with a designer, but they've had a look at it and tweaked it. But in my case, I was working with one of their designers because I didn't have a designer. I'd done the initial dummy myself, and then I was working with one of their designers, and we were tweaking it, and then Steidl was coming and checking it and being like, yes, no, and then you start doing color proofing and you sign off on the color proofing, and then you're given another date in a couple of months to come back for the printing, and you go and you can watch the whole process if you want. You can stay up all night while the printing press is going and watch the pages coming off. It was incredible, and a bit of a dream come true for sure.
I can imagine. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was the 2 pictures you mentioned in your afterwards, in the text of the book, which we actually have on display here in the gallery. So it's this picture of Nadir Aziz, and the one there behind you of the young boy with the Iraqi soldiers. And the thing that struck me about the picture of the young boy, first of all, was something you mentioned in the text as well. It's how these very kind of hard-bitten soldiers are looking after the boy that they found. And I think that you mentioned that specifically. It was very striking.
Yeah, that was, I mean, the striking thing at the time. I knew it. It was just so surreal, seeing this young, fragile child make it out of this hellscape of a war zone, which was the last bastion of ISIS in the old city in Mosul, and that had been totally destroyed at that point, and there were just like a small pocket of people still alive inside, mainly ISIS, hardcore ISIS guys and family members and people they were using as human shields. And to see this kid come out of that kind of scene, it was just so jarring, and that's why it kind of captivated these guys as well as me, and they just like forgot what they were doing, and we're all simultaneously kind of bewitched by this kid, and washed him and washed his clothes, and that's when I took this picture just after they'd kind of like cleaned him up, and then he put his head on one of their shoulders and closed his eyes for the first moment, and then was whisked away, and I never saw him again, although I tried to figure out what had happened to him, because the story was that one of the soldiers was going to adopt the kid, because the guy who had brought the kid out had been carrying the kid when he came out of this area, was thought to be an ISIS guy, because he said he didn't know anything about the kid. He just picked him up on the street, found him wandering around on his own, and had carried him out. And the soldiers, they didn't really buy that, because they were shooting anyone who was moving in that area, especially a man of fighting age. And this guy was, of that sort of age, and he didn't know anything about this kid. So they separated them, of course, and I don't know what happened to the man. But then, they didn't really know what to do with the kid. What they should have done is handed the kid over to an aid organization, of course. And this came up after the picture was published. A lot of like UNICEF and Save the Children all were getting in touch with the New York Times, saying, where is this kid? We need to like track this kid down, and this is wrong. And I was like, well, why weren't you there in the first place to sort it out? Because they weren't anywhere near this area of contention, which was really where you needed to be if you were going to help anyone. They were like way outside the city, and I know the soldiers were wrong in what they did, and I knew that, and I tried to follow up on it, but at the same time I was like, because there was a lot of it was quite aggressive the way the aid organizations kind of came at us. And we're like, where is this child? And I'm like, where were you? But I don't. It's troubling to this day. I don't know what happened to him, but most likely what did happen is he was adopted by one of the soldiers. And I tried on a number of occasions through our fixers and like the guys in Iraq to track down the unit, like, because I knew who the unit were, who the commander was, and everyone knew that situation. They knew exactly what happened, but they just pretended like they didn't know and they couldn't remember. So I'm pretty sure that's what happened. But I mean, even if it is, chances are he's got a better life than he was ever going to have. Whether he was going to be stuck with ISIS or would have then probably ended up under the rubble, or if he'd been taken in by an aid organization, he'd probably still be in sheltered housing somewhere. But whereas now, I don't know. I'd like to think that he's being taken care of, but who knows? But that's what it was like at the time. It was pretty crazy.
I suppose one of the most striking things looking at the book is thinking about you putting yourself in these very dangerous and kind of traumatic situations. And I did wonder if that had some kind of effect on you personally, or if you couldn't kind of wait to get back out there and to be making this work again, or is it kind of a mix of those two things?
It's not that I want to, get back as soon as I've, gotten home after doing something like this, but I'm definitely more sure than I ever was that this is, in a way, my calling and what I'm good at.
Yeah.
And it's only because I found a way in working with the New York Times to do it in a more controlled, and safer way. It's not entirely probably how you'd imagine it, and it's not like it used to be even for a lot of people that used to do this work. It changed. It changed not so long ago, like probably in 2013, 2014, after a lot of journalists, a lot of my colleagues were killed or injured and kidnapped in places like Syria and Libya during the Arab Spring, and it made news organizations realize that they weren't really doing things properly. They didn't have security advisors going with you. Very often, freelancers were there without insurance. They had no backup. No one checking in with them. Now, the New York Times, they have like a whole security department. Okay. And when we're going somewhere like Mosul, you're going with a ex, military personnel who's a battlefield medic, and is there to, if needs be, pull the plug if it's getting too dangerous. Okay. You're not just running around on your own, although I'm pretty, careful myself.
Okay.
But of course it affects you, and you feel burnt out, I probably didn't feel burnt out until it was all over. Because when you're in the midst of it, you're kind of constantly running on some sort of adrenaline. Even when you come home for a couple of weeks, but when the story's still going on, you're still in it, But it's when it's all over. So it's probably only in the last year or so that I've had time to think about it. And I mean, I think about some of the situations we got into in Iraq, and I can't quite imagine that actually happened. So I don't know how it is for other people, but it's definitely not easy for me, and it's not something I take lightly or want to kind of rush back to or do every day, because I don't think you can. It does take its toll. So I'll rather be able to do it for a longer period of time, do it in a safe way, do it at certain points when it's necessary. Like, I haven't really covered no, it's not entirely true, because I was in Azerbaijan last year. It was pretty bad, but I haven't sought out every armed conflict that's been going on since then to go and cover, because that's not why I do it. Although some people are a bit like that, for sure, but I think it takes its toll.
I can imagine. The last thing I might ask you about is this picture here, the picture of Nadira Aziz, because it seemed to me that it was kind of emblematic of your experience in some ways. It came to sum up your experience making the work.
Yes. It became a really seminal kind of picture in the whole project, and it was one of the stories we did after the fighting had ended. Probably like I think it was in August or September. Like a couple of months after the fighting had ended in Mosul. So it was, it was quieter. You were able to work in a more considered way. I was doing this story about the process of collecting all of the bodies that were buried under the rubble in Mosul, as part of the trying to take account of the civilian cost. And she was one of the families who I met during that time when I was with the civil defense workers, and was looking for her sister and niece in the remnants of like rubble of her house in the old city. So what would happen is the families of the people who were missing would go out with the civil defense to try and help them locate where their houses were and where they thought their loved ones were buried, because like it was completely destroyed. Like this was all 2-3 story buildings. It was just a field of rubble. And so they had to go with them to try and be like, I think that's where the house was.
Okay.
And that's why she was sitting there on the chair, and she just sat there the whole day directing the guys while they were digging through the rubble. And it was probably the most heart-wrenching scene I witnessed throughout the whole 2 years of covering that story, even though I probably saw more dramatic things, like people actually being killed in front of me or whatever. But watching her kind of desperately hope that they would just find something. She wasn't even. They weren't even. They were never even expecting to find actual bodies. They would just find bits and pieces of people. And some of their belongings. And at the end of the day, this was towards the end of the day, and she'd like found some of her stuff, that she was gathering, and they did find parts of her sister and her niece. But she didn't want to leave at the end of the day, and they literally had to pick her up and carry her away. And I remember being more broken by that than anything else I'd seen. And that's why that picture has, it's stuck with me, but it also seemed to resonate with people as well. Maybe because it's not that graphic and you don't really see anything, but it's what's suggested. That's the power of photography. Sometimes it doesn't need to show everything. Okay,
great. So we have a bit of time for questions. If anybody would like to ask Ivor anything, if you're watching on YouTube, you can also ask some questions. We'll get to them in the chat. If anybody would like to ask me, you can just take off your mask if you wanted to ask anything.
How long did you spend with that lady?
I mean, we were there the whole day, from early in the morning until sun went down. I was moving around a lot throughout that day, but when I was taking this picture, I was probably standing in this vague position for half an hour, 45 minutes, just watching. But shot all around, because at times she was getting up and going over and directing the JCB driver. She was incredible. She was really.
She didn't mind.
No. So before we went out with the civil defense and the families, we of course asked them, and introduced ourselves and said we were journalists and we wanted to document the process, and had to ask their permission because it was a really sensitive moment. You were going to be there when they found their loved ones. I was with another guy, I think the next day after this, who was going back into his neighborhood in Mosul to try and find his wife and 2 children and 2 of his brothers who were all killed, and he'd left, hastily buried and left behind because the fighting was so bad. And I went back with him and was there while they found, and so to be given permission to see that is it's a really humbling thing. And I remember she was just totally kind of fine with me being there, and
very interesting. Anybody else have any questions for Ivor? Anything they'd like to hear more about, or? Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you was that, when you're in these situations, is there a sort of priority given to photojournalists, to TV news crews? What is the kind of situation with your colleagues, I suppose, when you're out there?
You mean in terms of access?
In general,
mm-hmm.
But access as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. You see, the thing, the advantage you have as a photographer in a situation like this, where it's really difficult to accommodate people in a war zone.
Yeah.
Especially like on on an active front line.
Sure.
It's much easier to just take a photographer along who's not going to bother you, who's not he's not going to be kind of with a 5-man team and a big camera.
Yeah.
Or like bothering you with questions the whole time.
Yeah.
Although I do interview a bit, but like we're actually probably the more preferred candidates to go on these proper embeds, because you're just maybe just you, the photographer, a fixer, translator, and a security guy.
Okay.
So it's a smaller.
It takes
team.
up less space.
Yeah, and it's all about space.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Could I ask something?
Yes.
So I'll just bring this back for a second. Just
Sure.
what you're documenting. You were saying the New York Times give you a kind of a security package. You've got people there looking out for you. So you go and you're exposed. You're taking these images. And you're exposed to a trauma, but then you've got to go and edit those images and look at them again and again and again.
Yeah.
Is the support package you get, does it involve any sort of peer support, or how do you process it, constantly having to relive the images?
No, so they have psychological support as well if you wanted, a doctor on call 24/7. If you want. I've never actually spoken to them. But I've got my colleagues. I've got usually I'll speak with the security guys who I'm on the ground with. We process stuff together on the ground, and they're great because they've had a lot of experience over the years. And I talk with my family, my friends, and I think that's the key. Like, the problem is when you don't really talk to anyone about it and you bottle stuff up and you're trying to pretend like it's all totally normal, which is one coping mechanism I think that a lot of people do employ, but that's never going to work long term, so much more important to talk about it and be open about it and admit when you're tired and you don't want to go back. And that's, my editors were also really good at recognizing that, and sometimes they would be the ones who would be like, okay, that's enough, it's time to come out and go home. So
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Amazing work with it.
Thanks.
Anybody have any other questions for Ivor before we wrap up? Yourself there, You just take off your mask to talk, of course.
You mentioned that the logistics that the New York Times gave you, gave you a lot of access, like gave you a lot of freedom you wouldn't have otherwise had. And being with the Iraqi army offered you another level of freedom. But just in terms of the actual storytelling itself, what was that like with the New York Times? Were you given like a completely blank slate, or what was that like?
Good point. Pretty much, so like I said in the beginning, the first story I did with them was mostly work that I'd already done myself, and pitched to them and had kind of crafted myself, and I was like, this is what's going on at the moment, here's my story. And then every trip after that was on assignment for them, but it was pretty much carte blanche. It would be like, okay, we want you to go back, or I'd be like, I think we should go back because this is going to happen, it's a key moment, I want to go back and be there for this. And then I would just go in with a pretty open remit to see what we could see, and then would probably be on the ground for each story, like for up to 2 to 3 weeks, let's say, working on one piece. And in that time, I didn't really have much communication with my editors or with anyone at the New York Times, and I would just like be allowed to build a story myself, and then I would come out and be like, okay, I think I've got something, and then I would edit and send them the edit, and that's generally how it worked. Yeah, so I was pretty open, pretty lucky, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Is there any other questions that anybody has? Or any questions on?
We have one online from Neil
YouTube.
Dempsey. He wants to know, where are you going next, Ivor?
That's a good question. Well, going back to Istanbul on Monday, going home.
So that's also part of he follows up with, where do you go to decompress? Or how do you decompress?
Yeah, well, I live in Istanbul, which is actually a pretty great place, and yeah, can decompress pretty well there. If I really need to decompress, I come back here, go home to County Meath, see my family. But in terms of work, where am I going next? Yeah, it's strangely quiet in the Middle East at the moment, which is a good thing because it's been consistently in turmoil for the past 20, 30 years, let's say. Yeah, I'm potentially going to Syria in the next month or so to take another look at the kind of stagnated situation that is Syria. I'm not sure anyone really cares anymore, but we keep going. But yeah, that's about it. It's pretty quiet at the moment, which is not a bad thing. In the Middle East, at least. Afghanistan's the big, it's the big story this year, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Ivor, for such a fascinating discussion. This is Ivor's book, End of the Caliphate, and we have a couple of copies for sale downstairs. Ivor will be signing them if you were interested, so hang on for that. Just to let you know about a couple of upcoming events that we have. We'll be doing a book launch with Ross MacDonald later in the month. That's the 21st of October. We're also doing another book launch with Emile Calderon on the 27th. So if you keep an eye on our website, you'll find all the information about that. It was great to have people back in the gallery today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Ivor and to everyone at Prickett as well. So we appreciate it.
Thank you.